Paul Newman wasn't just an actor. To millions, he was the epitome of Hollywood cool, with those piercing blue eyes and unmatched screen presence. Then, the whispers started: feuds, creative differences, and tensions that simmered beneath his famously professional demeanor. Today, we're breaking the silence and laying out the 6 names that reportedly created the most friction throughout Newman's legendary career. Some are expected rivals from his competitive prime. Others, they might surprise you. Keep watching, because by the end, the complex web of Newman's rise, his most challenging relationships, and what they reveal about one of cinema's most respected figures will finally make sense. Let's dive in. Born in 1,925 inches, Shaker Heights, Ohio, Paul Newman's path to stardom wasn't the straight shot you might expect for someone with his natural gifts. After serving in the Navy during World War II, he initially pursued a business degree at Kenyon College before the acting bug bit him hard. Theater became his training ground, and by the early 1952s, Newman was cutting his teeth on live television productions and Broadway stages, places where mistakes couldn't be edited out and temperaments were tested in real time. His breakthrough came with 1956's Somebody Up There Likes Me, where he played boxer Rocky Graziano after the role was originally intended for James Dean, who had died in a car crash. It was the first of many instances where Newman would be compared to other leading men of his era, comparisons that sometimes sparked competitive tensions beneath Hollywood's polished veneer. What separated Newman from the pack wasn't just those legendary blue eyes, which he once self-deprecatingly called "my only distinguishing feature," but a naturalistic acting style that evolved with the times. From The Hustler to Cool Hand Luke, from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid to The Sting, Newman crafted characters who were flawed, complex, and unapologetically human. He received 9 Oscar nominations before finally winning for The Color of Money in 1986. But Newman's influence extended far beyond film. He became a racing enthusiast who competed professionally well into his 70s. He founded Newman's Own, donating all profits to charity, over $570 million since 1982. He was a political activist who made Richard Nixon's enemies list something he considered among his proudest achievements. And he maintained one of Hollywood's most enduring marriages with actress Joanne Woodward, lasting 50 years until his death in 2008. To the public, Newman projected an image of unflappable cool mixed with genuine humility, a rare combination in an industry built on ego. "A man with no enemies," film critic Roger Ebert once wrote. But Hollywood's carefully maintained public images often mask complicated realities, and even the most respected actors find themselves in situations where personalities clash, methods differ, and tension inevitably builds. However, behind the charming smile and professional demeanor that Newman maintained throughout his 6-decade career, industry insiders have long whispered about the actors who reportedly tested his legendary patience. The camera might have captured seamless chemistry, but between takes and behind closed doors, creative differences sometimes escalated into genuine friction. According to various biographies, interviews, and Hollywood lore, 6 fellow actors in particular seemed to challenge Newman's typically unflappable composure. These weren't simple disagreements that dissolved after a day's shooting. They represented fundamental clashes of acting philosophy, work ethic, and in some cases, moral worldview. From method actors whose immersive techniques Newman reportedly found excessive, to co-stars whose political views stood in stark opposition to his liberal activism, these relationships reveal the complex man behind the iconic blue eyes. As Newman himself once allegedly told a Complag, a reporter for Playboy magazine, in the 1970 seconds, "I can work with almost anybody, but there are limits to what I'll tolerate," were tested repeatedly throughout his storied career. What follows is a countdown of the 6 actors who reportedly pushed those boundaries furthest, the ones who, according to industry sources, biographers, and in some cases Newman's own carefully worded comments, created the most significant tension in his professional life. Number 6, Tom Cruise. The rising star whose approach to The Color of Money reportedly left Newman cold, a generational clash that mirrored their on-screen dynamic. When Paul Newman agreed to reprise his role as Fast Eddie Felson for Martin Scorsese's long-awaited sequel to The Hustler, few could have predicted the off-camera tension that would develop between the 6 one-year-old legend and his 2 4-year-old co-star. They met in 1986 during pre-production, with Newman allegedly taking an initially paternal interest in Cruise, who was already a massive star thanks to Risky Business and Top Gun. Their first readings together seemed promising. Veteran meets newcomer, a passing of the Hollywood torch. The trouble allegedly began during rehearsals, when their vastly different approaches to character preparation became evident. Newman, trained in the actor's studio method but known for his efficiency and lack of pretension, reportedly grew frustrated with Cruise's intense, all-consuming preparation style. According to crew members who spoke anonymously to Entertainment Weekly years later, Newman would arrive prepared, do his scenes brilliantly, and then leave to pursue his other passions. Cruise, meanwhile, would reportedly remain in character for hours, constantly asking questions and requiring extensive discussion about motivation. On screen, their dynamic crackled with the perfect tension, the aging pool hustler and the cocky young protege. But cameras couldn't capture the reported eye-rolling from Newman. When Cruise would allegedly demand dozens of takes to perfect moments, Newman felt worked perfectly well the first time. Paul was from the less is more school, a production assistant later told a Newman biographer. Tom was from the more is never enough approach. It was oil and water from day one. What fans saw was a masterclass in intergenerational acting, Newman's weathered wisdom playing beautifully against Cruise's raw energy. What they didn't see were the allegedly terse conversations between scenes, with Newman once reportedly telling director Scorsese, "I can't work this way." After Cruise requested a scene be reshot for what Newman felt was an imperceptible detail. The film's publicity tour revealed subtle hints of the tension. In joint interviews, viewers noticed Newman's occasional tight smile when Cruise would enthusiastically explain his character's psychology at length. When asked directly about working with Cruise, Newman was unfailingly polite but noticeably reserved, offering comments like, "Tom has his process, and I have mine. They're different, but they both got us where we needed to go." The irony wasn't lost on industry observers. Newman finally won his first Oscar for a film where the behind-the-scenes dynamics apparently mirrored the on-screen relationship, the old guard somewhat exasperated by the intensity of the new breed. The tension allegedly informed Newman's later reluctance to work with actors known for extreme preparation methods, with one director claiming Newman once told him, "I don't have time left for that kind of indulgence." What's perhaps most telling is that despite numerous opportunities, Newman and Cruise never worked together again. When asked years later about their collaboration, Cruise has always been effusive in his praise, while Newman, until his death in 2008, remained diplomatically vague. "We made a good picture," was his typical response. "That's what matters in the end." Ready for number 5. This next clash involves one of Hollywood's most notorious bad boys and a personality conflict that almost derailed a classic film. Number 5. Marlon Brando. The method-acting titan, whose behavior on The Young Philadelphians set allegedly led Newman to vow never to work with him again, a promise he kept for his entire career. Few people remember that Paul Newman and Marlon Brando were initially cast to appear together in the 1959 drama The Young Philadelphians. Their collaboration was supposed to be a landmark pairing of two of the 20-mile era's most magnetic actors, one established as a revolutionary force in American cinema, the other rising rapidly as a potential heir to the throne. But according to multiple sources, including the film's assistant director, who later spoke to Vanity Fair, the production became a powder keg of tension that ultimately resulted in Brando leaving the project before filming began. The conflict reportedly originated during pre-production meetings when Newman and Brando's fundamentally different approaches to the craft became apparent. Newman, despite his actor's studio training, had developed a reputation for professionalism, arriving prepared, knowing his lines, and respecting the schedule. Brando, meanwhile, was already becoming notorious for his unpredictability, script rewrites, and challenging of directors' visions. According to Newman: A Life by Sean Levy, the breaking point came during a rehearsal when Brando allegedly arrived 4 hours late, hadn't memorized the scene, and then suggested extensive rewrites because he wasn't feeling the character's truth. Newman, who had been waiting patiently with the rest of the cast and crew, reportedly exploded in a rare display of anger, telling Brando, "Some of us take this seriously enough to show up prepared." The confrontation allegedly escalated when Brando dismissed Newman's concerns with a casual wave, reportedly saying, "You're still thinking like a theater actor, Paul. Film is different." This dismissal of Newman's stage background, which he valued deeply, struck a nerve. According to a crew member who witnessed the exchange, Newman responded, "I'm thinking like a professional. Maybe you should try it." While the studio publicly claimed Brando left the production due to scheduling conflicts, industry insiders reported it was this clash with Newman that led to Brando's departure. Brian Keith ultimately took the role, and the film proceeded without further incident, though director Vincent Sherman reportedly told friends that the set was notably more relaxed after the casting change. What viewers never saw was the long-term impact of this brief but intense conflict. Throughout his career, Newman reportedly refused to consider projects where Brando was attached, even when producers suggested they would make a powerful on-screen pairing. According to longtime Newman friend and director Sidney Pollack, Paul wouldn't speak ill of Marlon publicly. That wasn't his style, but he made it clear to anyone who asked that they had incompatible approaches to work. Fans of both actors often speculate about what collaborations might have resulted had this early clash not occurred. Opportunities for them to share the screen in classics like The Towering Inferno or Apocalypse Now never materialized, with Newman allegedly telling his agent, according to multiple biographies, "Life's too short to work with people who don't respect other people's time." The fascinating epilogue came decades later when both men had achieved legendary status. When asked in a 1994 interview about actors he admired, Newman included Brando, noting, "His work in On the Waterfront changed everything. He could separate the artist from the man, but apparently never enough to risk working together again." And speaking of difficult relationships, you won't believe the tensions that reportedly emerged when Newman worked with our next actor, a clash that allegedly went far beyond creative differences to touch on politics, ethics, and the very nature of Hollywood itself. Number 4. Charlton Heston. The ideological opposite whose political views reportedly created an unbridgeable gulf with the liberal Newman, particularly during the heated civil rights era. When Paul Newman and Charlton Heston appeared together in 1974's disaster epic The Towering Inferno, viewers witnessed what appeared to be seamless professionalism between two of Hollywood's most bankable stars. What the cameras didn't capture, according to multiple sources, including crew members who later spoke to The Hollywood Reporter, was a set characterized by icy politeness and carefully maintained distance between the two icons. Their first meeting reportedly occurred years earlier at a Hollywood function in the early 1960 seconds, when both were rising to the peak of their fame. According to Newman's longtime friend Gore Vidal, who recounted the story in his memoirs, the initial interaction was cordial but strained, with Newman allegedly commenting afterward, "Nice guy, but we're from different planets." Those different planets would become increasingly apparent as the decade progressed and America's cultural divisions deepened. Newman emerged as one of Hollywood's most outspoken liberal activists, campaigning for Eugene McCarthy, speaking out for civil rights, and later landing on Nixon's infamous enemies list. Heston initially supported Democrats but gradually shifted rightward, eventually becoming the face of the National Rifle Association. These diverging paths reportedly created tension whenever they encountered each other at industry events. By the time The Towering Inferno began production, their political differences had allegedly calcified into mutual wariness. According to the film's second assistant director, who later spoke to a Newman biographer, the two stars maintained rigid professionalism but requested dressing rooms on opposite ends of the lot, rarely engaged in conversation when not filming. They knew better than to discuss anything beyond the scene at hand, the assistant director recalled. The temperature would drop 10 degrees when they were forced to share space. What audiences saw on screen were two professionals playing their roles effectively. Newman as the architect, Heston as the construction company owner. What they didn't see were the allegedly tense production meetings where both stars supposedly used their considerable clout to ensure equal screen time, billing, and importance to the story. Producer Irwin Allen reportedly joked that negotiating Middle East peace would have been easier than balancing the egos and conflicting worldviews of his two leads. The film's press tour revealed subtle hints of their strained relationship. They were rarely photographed together at premieres, gave interviews separately, and when asked about working together, both offered variations of professional respect without warmth. Newman reportedly told a journalist, "Charlton and I found common ground in wanting the film to succeed," a diplomatically empty statement that spoke volumes in what it didn't say. According to Paul Newman, A Life by Lawrence J. Quirk, the experience reinforced Newman's preference to work with like-minded colleagues when possible. He allegedly told his agent after the film wrapped, "I don't need the headache of spending months with someone who stands against everything I believe in." Heston, for his part, reportedly expressed similar sentiments to his inner circle. The fascinating aspect of this reported conflict is that it wasn't based on professional behaviors or acting methods, but on fundamental worldviews that extended far beyond Hollywood. As one producer who worked with both men noted, Paul and Charlton actually had similar professional ethics: prepared, punctual, respectful of crew. If politics hadn't existed, they might have been friends. Their paths crossed occasionally, at Academy Award ceremonies and industry events in subsequent decades, with both men maintaining the public politeness expected of Hollywood royalty. But according to those close to Newman, he privately considered his interactions with Heston among the most challenging of his career, not because Heston was unprofessional, but because their values diverged so fundamentally on issues Newman considered matters of moral urgency. Number 3, Steve McQueen. The rival superstar whose competitive streak and demanding behavior during The Towering Inferno reportedly pushed Newman to the brink of quitting the production. When two of the biggest movie stars of the 1,970 seconds were cast together in The Towering Inferno, studio executives likely anticipated some ego clashes. What they reportedly got, according to multiple crew members who later spoke to Entertainment Weekly and Variety, was a behind-the-scenes competition so intense it threatened to overshadow the burning building that was supposed to be the film's central drama. Newman and McQueen had circled each other professionally for years before this collaboration. They'd competed for many of the same roles, with McQueen reportedly turning down Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid because Newman had top billing. According to Newman's longtime friend and director George Roy Hill, Newman was initially excited about working with McQueen, telling Hill, "I think we could create something special together." That optimism allegedly evaporated during pre-production when McQueen's agent demanded contract changes to ensure his client received equal billing, identical pay to Newman's $1 million salary, and exactly the same number of lines. According to producer Irwin Allen's assistant, who later spoke to The Hollywood Reporter, Newman was stunned by these demands, reportedly telling Allen, "I didn't realize we were having a measuring contest here." The situation apparently deteriorated when filming began. According to the first assistant director, who shared his experiences in a film history book years later, McQueen would count his lines compared to Newman's and demand adjustments if he felt the balance was tipping. He allegedly insisted that both men stand on the same step when filming together, so neither would appear taller. Most famously, he reportedly requested that Newman's name appear first in the credits, but his own name be higher on the poster, creating the bizarre compromise still visible on the film's promotional materials. On screen, the two projected the perfect professional tension for their characters, Newman's architect and McQueen's fire chief, representing different approaches to the disaster. Off-camera, crew members reported an atmosphere thick with unspoken competition. According to a camera operator who worked closely with both stars, Paul tried to rise above it, but Steve's constant one-upmanship eventually got under his skin. You'd see Paul's jaw clench when another arbitrary demand came through. The breaking point allegedly came midway through production when McQueen insisted on a rewrite to give his character the film's climactic heroic moment, a scene originally scripted for Newman. According to Allen's memoirs, Newman nearly walked off the production, telling the producer, "This isn't filmmaking anymore. It's a playground contest." Only the financial implications of breaching his contract reportedly kept Newman on set. What viewers saw was a successful disaster film with two charismatic leads. What they didn't see was Newman's growing frustration, which allegedly manifested in his decision to never again work on a two-lead star vehicle where such competition could emerge. According to his longtime agent, who shared insights after Newman's death, after McQueen, Paul specifically sought projects where he was either clearly the lead or part of a true ensemble. He never wanted to deal with that brand of insecurity again. The aftermath of their collaboration proved telling. Despite opportunities to work together again, including projects like Towering Inferno 2 that were discussed but never produced, the two never shared the screen again. When asked years later about McQueen, Newman was unfailingly polite but noticeably brief, offering comments like, "Steve had his approach, I had mine," a diplomatic non-answer that industry insiders understood perfectly. Perhaps the most revealing comment came from director Mark Rydell, who worked with Newman on The Ravers and had been considered to direct McQueen in another project. According to Rydell, Newman once told him, "Working with McQueen taught me that the biggest stars aren't always the biggest professionals. I'd rather work with a talented newcomer than go through that circus again." Think that rivalry was intense? Wait until you hear about number 2 on our list, a clash so fundamental it allegedly changed how Newman approached his entire craft. Number 2, Robert Redford. The Golden Boy collaborator, whose laid-back attitude toward preparation reportedly frustrated the methodical Newman, despite their legendary on-screen chemistry. When audiences think of classic Hollywood partnerships, Newman and Redford in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting rank among the most beloved pairings in cinema history. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable. Newman's wry, talkative charm playing perfectly against Redford's cooler, more taciturn presence. But according to numerous sources, including director George Roy Hill, who helmed both films, creating that chemistry required navigating a fundamental clash of working styles that occasionally tested Newman's legendary patience. They first crossed paths in 1969 when casting Butch Cassidy in The Sundance Kid. Newman was already established royalty, while Redford was the promising up-and-comer fighting for the role against established stars like Steve McQueen and Warren Beatty. Their initial meeting was cordial, but according to producer Richard Zanuck, who recalled the interaction in his autobiography, Newman immediately sensed their different approaches. "Paul came in, having read the script a dozen times with notes in the margins," Zanuck wrote. "Robert was more intuitive, asking questions about the character's feelings rather than specific scenes." This contrast in preparation styles allegedly became the central tension throughout both their collaborations. According to crew members from Butch Cassidy, Newman would arrive each morning with his lines memorized, blocking planned, and character choices made. Redford, meanwhile, preferred a more spontaneous approach, finding the character in the moment, sometimes changing his interpretation take by take. Hill reportedly told friends that directing them was like conducting two different instruments that somehow produced perfect harmony. On screen, this difference enhanced their chemistry. Off camera, it occasionally created friction. According to the script supervisor from The Sting, who later spoke to Film Comment magazine, Newman once grew visibly frustrated during a complex scene when Redford wanted to experiment with different approaches after Newman had carefully prepared a specific interpretation. Paul finally said, "I've been working on this scene for 3 days, Bob. Pick a direction so we can move forward," the supervisor recalled. Redford just smiled and said, "But isn't the not knowing what makes it interesting?" While fans saw seamless camaraderie, insiders reported that Newman and Redford rarely socialized off-set during their collaborations. Their relationship was cordial but professional, more colleagues than friends. According to Newman's longtime friend and screenwriter Stuart Stern, Newman once confided, "I admire Bob's talent immensely, but I couldn't work that way all the time. The uncertainty would drive me crazy." The most telling moment allegedly occurred during the filming of The Sting. When Newman discovered Redford hadn't read the script's third act until the week they began shooting those scenes. According to Hill's assistant director, Newman was genuinely baffled, asking Redford, "Don't you want to know where the character is going?" Redford reportedly responded, "I'd rather discover it along the way, like the character would." This philosophical difference in approaching craft apparently left Newman shaking his head in a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. What makes this reported tension particularly interesting is that unlike other entries on our list, it never prevented further collaboration. Despite their differences, both men recognized the magic they created together. As Newman reportedly told director Sidney Pollack years later, "Working with Redford is like trying to build a watch with someone who doesn't believe in blueprints. Somehow, the damn thing still tells perfect time." Their different approaches extended to publicity as well. Newman, always guarded about his private life, reportedly grew frustrated with Redford's even more extreme reclusiveness during press tours. According to a publicist who worked on The Sting, Newman once remarked after Redford skipped a major promotional event, "Some of us understand that selling the movie is part of making the movie. Despite these tensions, there remains immense mutual respect." In interviews following Newman's death in 2008, Redford spoke warmly about their collaboration, saying, "Our differences in approach created a balance that worked for the films." He acknowledged their different styles but framed them as complementary rather than conflicting, a diplomatic perspective that Newman likely would have appreciated, even if privately he might have added, "But a little more preparation wouldn't have hurt." Now we've arrived at number 1, the actor whose relationship with Newman reportedly evolved from mentor-mentee to the most painful professional disappointment of his career. This isn't just about creative differences. It's about a betrayal that allegedly cut to the core of Newman's values. Number 1, James Dean. The rising star, whose method, intensity, and self-destructive tendencies allegedly created profound conflict with Newman before Dean's tragic death, altered the trajectory of both their careers. The relationship between Paul Newman and James Dean represents Hollywood's most poignant what-if, a brief, allegedly tense interaction between two icons that ended before it could fully develop, yet reportedly left deep impressions on Newman that lasted throughout his career. Their paths crossed briefly at the Actors Studio in New York in the early 1950 seconds, where, according to multiple biographies, including James Dean, The Mutant King by David Dalton, the established theater actor Newman found himself both fascinated and frustrated by the younger, more instinctively brilliant Dean. According to Actors Studio colleagues who later shared their observations with biographers, Newman, trained in the techniques of the method but disciplined in his application, reportedly watched with a mixture of admiration and concern as Dean pushed boundaries in class exercises, sometimes emotionally overwhelming himself and fellow students. As one classmate reportedly told a Dean biographer, Paul would observe Jimmy with this look, part envy of his rawness, part concern for where that intensity might lead him. Their different approaches to the craft allegedly crystallized during a famous workshop scene where Dean became so emotionally immersed that he reportedly broke down sobbing and couldn't continue. Newman, observing from the sidelines, allegedly commented to a fellow actor, "That's not acting anymore. That's therapy." According to multiple accounts, Dean overheard this remark and confronted Newman afterward, reportedly saying, "At least I'm not afraid to feel something real." The tension between them reportedly deepened when both were considered for roles in East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause. Though Newman, they was slightly older, they were frequently up for the same parts, sensitive young men struggling against authority and convention. According to casting directors who worked on both films, Newman's more controlled approach often lost out to Dean's volatile authenticity for these breakthrough roles. The most significant connection between them came through the film Somebody Up There Likes Me, the biographical story of boxer Rocky Graziano. Dean was cast in the lead role and had begun preparation when his fatal car crash in September 1955 changed everything. Newman, who had reportedly had another tense encounter with Dean just weeks before the accident, was offered the role as a replacement. According to Newman's longtime friend Jackie Whitty, He was deeply conflicted about taking a role that came to him through such tragic circumstances. Newman reportedly told her, "I don't know whether to feel guilty for benefiting from his death or to honor him by doing the best work I can." The film launched Newman's career as a leading man, a path that might have been significantly different had Dean lived. What makes this relationship top our list isn't just their brief but reportedly tense interactions, but how Dean's ghost allegedly haunted Newman's career for decades. According to numerous accounts, including interviews with directors who worked closely with him, Newman grew tired of the constant comparisons to Dean that followed him through the late 1950 seconds and early 1960 seconds. Critics and fans repeatedly framed him as the next James Dean, or noted how he lacked Dean's dangerous edge comparisons that reportedly frustrated Newman deeply. According to director Arthur Penn, who worked with both actors, Newman once confided, "I couldn't stand his approach to the work, but I've spent half my career being compared to him. It's like being in a relationship that never ends." This sentiment was echoed by director George Roy Hill, who claimed Newman told him during filming of Butch Cassidy, "I finally feel like I've escaped Dean's shadow and found my own space." The most revealing evidence of this complicated relationship came in a rare unguarded moment during a 1970 seconds interview when a journalist directly asked Newman about Dean. According to witnesses, Newman grew unusually quiet before responding, "Jimmy had something I never had, a natural access to emotions I had to work for. But he paid a price for that access that I wasn't willing to pay." When pressed on what he meant, Newman reportedly changed the subject, unwilling to speak ill of the dead. This complex mixture of professional rivalry, philosophical disagreement about acting, and the strange twist of fate that launched Newman's career through Dean's tragedy makes this the most significant and complicated relationship on our list. It wasn't just a clash of personalities or working styles. It represented fundamental questions about art, authenticity, and the personal cost of creative brilliance that Newman reportedly wrestled with throughout his legendary career. What do you think about these reported tensions in Paul Newman's career? Were you surprised by any of the names on our list? The fascinating thing about Hollywood relationships is how they're shaped by the intersection of art, commerce, ego, and the intense pressure of creating under public scrutiny. Even the most seemingly unflappable stars like Newman navigated complicated professional waters throughout their careers. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood history, hit that subscribe button and join us for more explorations of the stories behind the stars. Next week, we'll be looking at the directors who transformed struggling actors into Oscar winners through notoriously difficult on-set methods. Drop a comment below letting us know which of Newman's films is your personal favorite. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, this is Hollywood Uncovered, where the real drama happens when the cameras stop rolling.